Hello and welcome to Zero In News. I'm Oliver Moore, your host, and today we will be zeroing in on an experiment put on by some University of Wisconsin Stout students and their teachers. Today on Zero In News, I'll be interviewing a professor that challenged their students to grow potatoes in Mars-like soil. I'll also be interviewing one of the students who was challenged to grow some potatoes. So now, let's get right into it. It's about time for the professor to be here. I wonder when he'll be here. Oh, that must be him right now, knocking on my door. Better go get the door, guys. In a couple minutes, I'll be back with the professor and hopefully he can answer some of my questions. So, why exactly did you challenge a couple special students to grow potatoes in Mars-like soil? I mean, what prompted you to give them that challenge? Well, Oliver, one of the main reasons we challenged our students to grow potatoes in Mars-like soil is because we wanted to further explore the plot of the movie Martian, where the main character attempts to grow plants on Mars. We also just wanted to see if it was possible to grow an organic plant from Earth, like potatoes, on Mars or Mars-like soil. And, how did you create the Mars-like soil for the students to grow their potatoes in? Well, first, we gathered about 400 pounds of glacial subsoil from nearby, and then we fired it at about 1,000 degrees in an oven to burn off any organic substances that would help plants like potatoes from Earth grow. And where did the students, grow the potatoes? Where were they stationed for this experiment? Well, the students, they grew the potatoes in a greenhouse or dirt lab that we created on the campus. Well, the greenhouse itself, it wasn't too exciting. It was pretty much just, your normal greenhouse with like your clear plastic, and then we set up some trays in it and put some cabinets with all the materials that the students would need to grow their potatoes. Well, Grant, I think that comes to the end of our interview. I'm sorry we couldn't have a longer interview. It was a pleasure to interview with you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being on the show. Yeah, we will be interviewing a UW Stout student who actually attempted to grow some potatoes and succeeded as far as I'm concerned. Hello, Oliver Moore, right? Yeah, I'm Peter. I'm glad to be on the show with you today. So, today I'll be telling you a little bit more about the experiment we did at UW Stout. That'd be great, Peter. Well, our teachers wanted us to do this because they wanted us to explore the plot of the movie Martian a little bit more, as you already know. From what your professor said, I'm kind of under the impression that you kind of launched into it head first. They gave you some materials and then you started to experiment things. Is that correct? Well, we were given some raw materials and ingredients that we were allowed to use to help us grow potatoes. And then we learned the knowledge we had learned about science and plants and things that year that we had learned so far, and to help us grow the potatoes, or attempt to grow the potatoes in the Mars-like soil that our professors had created for us. Do you expect that you would succeed in this, that your potatoes would actually grow in the Mars-like subsoil that your teachers created for you? I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised that I learned that my potatoes were growing, when you're like, oh, potatoes and like stuff that, and like Earth's plants growing on Mars, I'm like, oh, that's a thing in the movies. But since what I've learned in science class this year, and because of this experiment, I learned that what you think is impossible isn't really impossible. Nothing's impossible. Did you enjoy this experiment? I mean, I think you would have, but do you think you're lucky that you were one of the students chosen for this? Do you think you're glad that you were one of the few students chosen to do this experiment? I think I'm very lucky to have the experience to do this experiment. I think it's a one in a lifetime experiment. I mean, like, who gets to grow potatoes in Mars-like soil? Like, that's just crazy. I think I'm really lucky that I was one of the few students chosen to do this, and I'm really proud. Oh, we've gone over why you did this experiment and pretty much how you did this experiment, and that it is in fact possible to grow Earth's plants on Mars or Mars-like soil. So is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up this interview? I'm sure I could go on for hours about the specifics of my experiment and the experiment, but I think that you've covered all the basics, that we've covered all the basics. So I better get back to college, and you better get back to your daily reporting. I bet. So thanks for having me on the show. It was a great pleasure to be on the show. So yeah, thank you, Oliver. Peter, it was a great pleasure to have you on the show as well. Thanks for telling me about your experiment. See you later. Well, guys, I think this about wraps up this episode of Zero In News. This episode came to you from Ashland, Wisconsin. I'm Oliver Moore, your host, signing off.